Okay, you can just almost, yeah.
Not swallow it, right?
Don't swallow it. Are you ready? Okay. Ready? Okay. Okay, so let's get back to it. I'd like to introduce Taller de Cascadia, presenting Black Islands. So please welcome them.
Okay. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks Radical Networks team for inviting us to participate here, and obviously Sarah and Erica, which I don't see right now. Thank you guys for the hard work. Okay, so his name is Jorge, I am Álvaro. We are two of the 4 members of Taller de Casquería. We are a team of architects based in Madrid. We are a research-based practice aiming to develop tools and mechanisms from different topics in order to be applied then to space, city, or society. We are especially interested in, at least in the last projects, in how digitalization affects society as a whole, and particularly architecture, in the way we live, the way we relate to each other, our social structure, or the appearance of new spaces and new communities, but also the understanding of its materialization as we face a world in which distant, disembodied relations tend to be more and more relevant. That's why the project we're going to talk about is going to be talk more from a social or a spatial point of view rather than a really technical one, since that's our background. So today we're going to talk about Black Islands, which is an ongoing research project on how Google Earth failures or mishaps could represent the spaces of opportunity, areas where to challenge cartography's control. Therefore, we have to first understand the legal and political context regarding this power that cartography has, especially in this case related to the politics of the sea. So I have to go a little back ago to start from the beginning, a long time ago. In the mid-18th century, Italian engineer, it was a long time ago, Italian engineer Ferdinand Galliani used to shoot his collection of cannons several times a day, aiming to determine the outer range that the most developed artillery piece of his time could reach out of a single shot. After countless of shots, he could certainly state that a gunshot could cover a distance up to 5,556 meters, or 3 nautical miles. This was important because this distance completed the first legal treaty dealing with the expansion of a state's continental sovereignty to the neighboring seas. And then a new kind of sovereign figure appeared called territorial seas, which concern adjacent waters to a coastal state. This area was then legally defined and got to be known as the canon shot rule. Seas became then part of the territory as a defensive barrier, and in the law, this would translate as power over the land ends, wherever the force of arms ends. Back to the modern age, the first modern approach to an international legislation for the seas began in 1983 after Ronald Reagan, in the context of the last stage of the Cold War, unilaterally extended the sovereignty of the USA border over to the adjacent waters up to 200 nautical miles. Under, and I quote, the purpose of exploring, exploiting, conserving and managing the submarine resources exclusively. This border extension not only helped American territory to double its size, but defined a new area of sovereignty, which was called the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ. This event detonated the development of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or the UNCLOS, which was not finished and applied until 1994.
The UNCLOS defines the rights and duties of any state or person with respect to the sea. Final document came into force in 1994 and consists on more than 400 articles that try to give a precise solution to any possible dispute related to the sea. As it happens with every law, once defined its limits, also the ambiguous parts or the areas of opportunity appear. One of the most significant articles is the review of the Ronald Reagan sovereign self-proclamation and the definition of this exclusive economic zone. The exclusive economic zone establishes an area of sovereignty within 200 nautical miles, more or less 370 kilometers, of a state's coastline. It's something similar to an offset to a coastline, which becomes part of the territory. This article caused a distortion in the political map of the world, making coastal countries expand and causing the appearance of new borders in between them and the disappearance at the same time of areas free of sovereignty, for example, like continental seas. This is a map that shows the political situation in the Mediterranean Sea and surroundings. For the most powerful coastal states, the key to dominate as much territory as possible lies in the extension of the boundaries of this EEZ. The most relevant article to this end is the number 121, which defines what is probably the most ambiguous part of the convention, insularity. Although exclusive economic zones are measured from the coastal lines, an island has many coasts, and it gets even trickier in the cases of coastal states that has islands close to its coast. This issue represents a good opportunity to gain exploitable area, so islands become the key element in the economic aspirations of the coastal states. To understand this, we first have to see exactly what an island is in legal terms. According to UNCLOS, an island is a naturally formed area of land surrounded by water, which is above water at high tide and capable of sustaining human habitation or economic life of its own. Due to the appearance of this article, occupations of hardly inhabitable islets and reefs increased vastly in order to justify that in legal terms they were islands and they could, in fact, expand these zones of control. Among all the current geopolitical conflicts of this linked to the situation, the South China Sea is home to the most significant one of them.
Okay, so limited by the coast of Taiwan, China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Brunei, and Malaysia, the control over the South China Sea is in dispute due to the limits of their respective exclusive economic zones since the 1970s, where they carried out the first oil explorations and, of course, found rich subsoil in hydrocarbons. This map shows the political situation before the application of the UNCLOS, with an equitable distribution of the areas in between the countries involved in the political dispute. After enforcing the law, after enforcing the law, the sovereignty of each coastal country was reduced up to 200 nautical miles, measured from each country's coastline. So, as a result, there was a strip of international waters equidistant from all of the coast, which was a particularly interested resolution for the rest of the countries, since it was international waters then. We are now seeing the 9-dash line, which represents the Chinese territorial demands regarding the South China Sea. This claim in the expansion of China's EEZ is mainly supported by China's demand of sovereignty over the Spratly Archipelago, which you can see circled in the center of the image. And at the same time, all of the countries involved in this conflict claim sovereignty over some of these islands in order to extend their own EEZ and dominate at least part of this South China Sea. The Spratly Archipelago, which was discovered by the British sailor Henry Spratly in 1791, is composed by over 100 islets and reefs which were zero important, politically at least, until 2 centuries later. And up until now, the Spratly Islands do not have a definite nationality, although the United Nations acknowledge conditions of occupation and control until a final legal resolution is achieved. All of the countries involved in this political dispute have developed different and corresponding to their size and power strategies for controlling the archipelago, through traditional military conquest and economic supremacy to symbolic or civic occupation. The basis of all these strategies is not only domination or physical control, but they aim to legally demonstrate that these spaces can be in fact considered islands legally, according to the UNCLOS, and therefore they can extend each country's sovereign economic zones.
The amount of information with which we have to determine what exists and what doesn't has increased vastly. The senses with which we measure our environment are disrupted by apps, layers, tools, and virtual tools that expand our resources to determine what is, so to say, real and what isn't. And as John Nada's sunglasses in Carpenter's 1988 movie They Live, these kind of virtual senses, so to call them, help us to decode information that surrounds us, enhancing on the one side our possible understanding on the context we're set in, or pointing us to a certain direction. It's a great movie if you didn't know it. The Spratly Islands are therefore not only to be found in real life, so to call it, but also as part of this virtual scene. Google Earth, as we all know, displays the globe through satellite photography, which works thanks to an algorithm that applies a picture taken by one of these satellites to a virtual topographic model. Google Earth shows us an instantaneous version of reality that evolves as the database grows. The system configures its levels of definition depending on the strategic interest that they may reveal, meaning Google Earth displays reality as the reality of disparate resolutions. We're all aware that Google Earth is a product of a specific company, USA, blah, 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 which obviously conditions the way we see the Earth's surface to a political point of view. Anyhow, this world of disparate resolutions generates areas of uncertainty, opening a wide range of possible interpretations. However, the system is not only fed by satellite images. Users can also add, through different tools, more layers of information with the result of what we call something like a panoptical cartographic archive, something like a collectively generated reality. One of these tools is Wikipedia. Information from Wikipedia can be geotagged in Google Earth, providing a specific geographical point with a particular information package. In other words, it provides a location with a story. Unlike Wikipedia, Google Images, formerly known as Panoramio, is an image geotagging service based on each user's individual experiences. Each user reflects his experiences in images that will later be geotagged on a corresponding location in Google Earth. The shared information generates a collective image out of many single ones, a set made out of fragments contributed by the users that can be read in many different ways. Google Earth, Wikipedia, and Google Images conform the cornerstones that shape the virtual scenario for the South China Sea conflict.
Okay, so while traditional conquest strategies were always based on the physical occupation of a space, these new communication tools could offer different alternatives. Virtual occupation relies on these described virtual scenarios bases in order to impact what we could call, in like a really colloquial way, real life. But representation systems undergo a disruption in its meaning, turning Google Earth into a battlefield, Wikipedia into a historical narrator, and Google Images into the equivalent of raising a flag in a territory in dispute. For example, Swallow Reef, which is part of the Spratly Islands, has 21 geotag images. 6 of them show Chinese symbols, flags, or residents. Another 4 show Vietnamese monuments and constructions, while the remaining 11 depict Western tourists sunbathing in Malaysian resorts during their holidays. Although the United Nations legally recognizes the Malaysian occupation on this reef, obviously this space is also being virtually occupied by geotagging information. Consequently, we could review the political conflict through this geotag information. The collection of images found in this area shows military power, national symbols, peaceful occupation, or warlike practices, claiming through the caption of the images the authorship of the act and the sovereignty of its territory. This information also seeks to prove that these different locations could indeed be legally considered as islands, since these pictures depict the legal conditions required by the UNCLOS Article 121 for any terrain to be considered an island. The amount of information we have to take into account while looking at this kind of cartography is even started to disrupt the home map itself. The result of this new way of occupation produces a distortion of our geographic representation systems, now altered by geotagged information with a determined geographic position and a political repercussion. Virtual occupation relies on its users' inputs, and although a state is capable of locating specific information packages on a virtual plane, many individual users are already doing it on their own. Citizens defend their virtual territory through geolocation and discussion forums. In every picture that's uploaded, there's a sovereignty claim inserted in the captions, images, and comments. And now we're going to listen to a couple of these captions, which could be a little bit offensive.
I think we have no audio.
So
Really notes.
maybe not.
Well, it's kind of an aggressive way of discussing and claiming sovereignty over the different spaces. And we just...
These are obviously like automatically translated, so
Yeah, it's...
something around that.
Okay, pásalo si quieres. Okay, in Laura Corrigan's close-up at a distance, she reflects about the necessary interpretation of an image and the imaginative steps to do so. She even refers to it as being halfway in between an artistic and a scientific process. Laura Corrigan exemplifies this with statements made by Colin Powell, former US Secretary of State. Colin Powell justified Iraq's possession of weapons of mass destruction, which led to the 2003 invasion, with some satellite images that, as he said, were self-explanatory. As he later acknowledged, these images needed at least some interpretation, additional information, or even imagination in order to justify that they were irrefutable proof of the presence of these weapons, which in fact they weren't, as it was later proven. But what happens when failures appear? As is a glitch susceptible of interpretation? We're now seeing some of the images of Clement Valla's postcards from the Google Earth, which is a collection of Google Earth's algorithm compilation errors applying a flat image to a virtual topography. We immediately understand these images as failures, unreal images given their distance with what is physically possible. However, if we were only to trust our, so to call them, virtual senses, our way of looking to this information, could we understand this as a soft road, for example? The Google Earth algorithm is a constantly evolving system, and its database updates provide an ever clearer view of the Earth's surface. However, there are still some dissonant spots. Momentary interferences in the connection between satellites and terrestrial receivers, failures in the process of mapping a flat image of a virtual topography, or the censoring actions that many states force into certain points of their geographical representation, breed what we call like a new territorial typology, this kind of virtual voids. Their lack of definition makes them areas of opportunity sensitive of being interpreted. A close look through the South China Sea reveals a collection of 9 black spots, many of them already involved in this kind of virtual occupation dispute. As if there were 9 black islands, China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Vietnam, and Malaysia participate in this blind bid through their citizens in order to annex as much territory as possible, both physical and virtual. The successful occupation of a space depends on the settler's capacity to react to the context in which they're set in. Each place requires a specific technique of settlement adapted to the environment. But how are we to inhabit, so to say, a void whose characteristics we ignore? Virtual settlers are challenged to understand the laws that define the spaces in order to inhabit this territory. The context these settlers have to face is not clearly shaped. It's a dynamic territory, panoptical and constantly evolving, a volatile territory defined by the expiration date of the images that shape it. In view of this situation, could we understand this black spot as a void as a potential void to be occupied? Could we virtually occupy this space without depending on any state or organization turning it into real or legal territory? Could we generate then a collectively territory? Could it be then, so to say, a black island? In the mid-19th century, going back again, during the Dutch occupation of the island of Java in what now is Indonesia, the scientist Willem Junghun developed what became like the ultimate colonization weapon, which is this Java cat, extremely precise plan of the island for that moment. The recently ended Java war at that time confronted the Dutch rulers with the guerrillas led by Prince Diponegoro. The knowledge of this person, of the local geography, and the Dutch's lack of a precise cartography made him resist far longer than expected, especially in such an unbalanced situation. Diponegoro used the lack of definition as a resistance strategy. Quoting Anna Sophie Springer and Etienne Turpin, which had a very interesting publication related to all this, they provided both the evidence of the colonized territory and an instrument for further domination. In his recently released New Dark Age, British artist James Birdell quotes a 1926 text by American writer Howard Philip Lovecraft, which I will briefly read. But someday, the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such a terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the safety of the new dark age. Maybe failures are the only way to escape cartography and its binding control. Occupying and inhabiting these errors is a way of taking the chance. Every update in Google Earth provides us with new appearances and disappearances. So these black islands will disappear whenever Google Earth's algorithm is capable of amending its errors. Only the testimonies of those who achieve to occupy them will remain. Thank you.
Wow. Lots of applause. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? We can take a couple. Okay. Okay. Well then thank you again, and we'll welcome our next speaker up, who actually.